how can the UN General Assembly talk about two-state solutions when they cannot enforce their own decisions?
That possibly relates to the last part of my previous answer when I mentioned that all the steps which these states have taken are important and significant, but they are not sufficient because they lack coordination with the United States. And that's a point which possibly addresses your question here. The United States has the veto, it's a permanent member. So any kind of abiding solution and a resolution from the Security Council is going to be blocked by the United States because the US is backing Israel, as we know. So, with the current framework which we have at this moment in the United Nations, it's very hard to think about a possible path for a solution through the United Nations. In my opinion, the solution is going to be bottom up rather than top down. So, we should think about these states coordinating together to build, if you will, the infrastructure of that Palestinian state which they have just recognized.
But would
One
they
of the things,
fear, like these Western countries, I know have, even though they are posturing, but there's also still the fear that recognizing a Palestinian state may, gain the wrath of the Trump administration. Are they fearful of an American response towards them?
my understanding is that they are not, because one of the points which has been discussed with President Trump on his visit to the UK was the recognition of the Palestinian state. So it was obvious that the US position is that it rejects the recognition of that state, whereas the UK went through and they announced that they are planning, and they did so yesterday, of course, to recognize the Palestinian state. So that recognition is, as I mentioned, is very important, but it lacks the mechanism of real and tangible support to the Palestinians. In other words, when we want to think about the best way, in my opinion, to help the Palestinian people is number one, recognizing the Palestinian state, which is very important, but number two, to follow through on tangible measures like building the infrastructure needed for that Palestinian state. So, one of the reasons, one of the excuses the US administration is providing for not recognizing the Palestinian state is that they say it lacks the component of a state. There is no army, there is no credible authority. They obviously don't recognize the PA as a partner in,
Yes.
the
But this is all by
going.
design by the occupation forces.
And that is why one important thing that the Western states should work together is creating a kind of number one moral pressure, which they are doing through the UN, and that is in my opinion, what is happening now, creating moral pressure because we know that the UN doesn't have, unlike the Security Council, the binding force. Like Chapter 7, for example, to enforce the Israelis to do something. So that moral pressure should be, which is created now in New York, should be invested towards tangible measure on the ground to help, as I mentioned, building the infrastructure and the component of the Palestinian state. Through that only, I think there will be that will be the best way, the ideal way for a path through the Palestinian state with its recognition and infrastructure. But as I mentioned, with the current framework we have in the UN, we are unfortunately unable to force the Israelis towards any kind of
Yes.
stopping their war machine.